June 6, 1944. Normandy, France. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. 156,000 Allied troops storming 5 beaches. Thousands of casualties in the first hours. Blood turning the surf red. Medics overwhelmed. Wounded men screaming for help on the sand while German artillery shells exploded around them. And in the middle of this hell, a 28-year-old British woman named Margaret Maggie Thornton was driving what everyone called the worst ambulance in the entire Allied invasion force. It was a 1932 Bedford truck, 12 years old. Civilian model converted into a makeshift ambulance. No armor plating. No military suspension. Engine that sputtered and stalled. Transmission that ground and slipped. Brakes that barely worked. Paint peeling off. Rust showing through. The thing looked like it belonged in a scrapyard, not on a battlefield. The American medics laughed at it. That piece of junk won't last 5 minutes under fire. The British officers tried to reassign her to a newer vehicle. Thornton, you can't take that death trap onto the beach. It's not combat ready. Maggie refused. This truck has got me through 3 years of the Blitz. It'll get me through today. They thought she was insane, sentimental, foolish, attached to a worthless vehicle that would get her killed. They had no idea what that old truck was capable of, and they had no idea what Maggie Thornton was capable of, because over the next 3 hours, from 7:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944, Maggie Thornton would drive that piece of junk ambulance into active combat zones under continuous German artillery and machine gun fire, make 17 trips between the beach and the field hospital, and evacuate 300 wounded soldiers who would have died if she hadn't reached them. 300 lives. 3 hours. 1 woman. 1 old truck. And by the time she was done, that ambulance, the one everyone mocked, would be so riddled with bullet holes and shrapnel damage that you could see daylight through the sides. The windshield would be shattered. The tires would be shredded and running on rims. The engine would be held together with wire and prayer. But it would still be running. And Maggie would still be driving. This is the story of the worst ambulance in the Allied invasion force, and the woman who turned it into the most effective life-saving vehicle on Omaha Beach. Let's talk about the truck first, because understanding what Maggie was driving makes what she accomplished even more impossible. 1932 Bedford WTL 2-ton truck, civilian commercial vehicle, built for delivering goods in peacetime Britain. Not designed for military use. Not designed for combat. Not designed for anything remotely resembling what Maggie was about to put it through. The specifications were pathetic by military standards. 27 horsepower 6-cylinder petrol engine. Top speed of 30 miles per hour on good roads. Maybe 20 miles per hour on rough terrain. 4-speed manual transmission with no synchro mesh, meaning every gear change required double clutching and perfect timing. Mechanical drum brakes that required significant physical force to operate. Leaf spring suspension designed for smooth roads, not bomb craters and beach sand. And by 1944, it was 12 years old, ancient by military vehicle standards. When Maggie acquired the truck in 1941 for ambulance service during the London Blitz, it was already 9 years old and barely functional. She spent 3 years keeping it alive and modifying it for emergency medical transport. She removed the original cargo bed and built a custom enclosed compartment with a wooden frame covered with canvas tarp. No metal, no armor, just wood and canvas. Inside, she installed bench seating along both sides for wounded soldiers, tie-down straps to secure stretchers on the floor, small storage compartments for medical supplies, and ventilation holes cut in the sides, which would later become bullet holes. She rebuilt the carburetor 3 times to improve fuel efficiency, replaced worn piston rings to reduce oil consumption, installed a manual choke override so she could start the engine in any conditions, added an extra oil reservoir because the engine burned oil constantly. She replaced the clutch twice, fabricated custom gear synchronizers from scrap metal, learned to shift without using the clutch when necessary to save where on components. She replaced brake shoes 4 times, added extra return springs to improve brake response, learned to use engine braking, and downshifting to compensate for weak brakes. She added extra leaf spring scavenged from a scrap truck, reinforced the frame with welded steel plates at stress points, installed rubber bushings made from cut-up tire inner tubes to reduce vibration. She rewired the entire electrical system after a fire in 1942, installed a backup battery scavenged from a bombed-out car, added extra headlights for night driving during blackouts. By 1944, replacement tires were nearly impossible to obtain. Maggie was running on mismatched tires from different vehicles. 2 of them had been patched multiple times. She carried 2 spare tires and a full tire repair kit at all times. The result was a Frankenstein's monster of a vehicle, held together with scrap parts, improvised repairs, and sheer determination. It looked terrible. It sounded worse. The engine made a grinding, clattering noise that could be heard from a quarter-mile away. It broke down constantly. But Maggie knew every bolt, every wire, every quirk of that engine. She could diagnose problems by sound. She could repair most failures with the tools she carried. She knew exactly how hard she could push it before something broke. She knew how to coax it through conditions that would kill a normal vehicle. The American medics called it the rust bucket. The British soldiers called it Maggie's miracle. The German soldiers who saw it driving through artillery fire called it der Geistwagen, the ghost truck, because they couldn't believe it kept running no matter how many times they hit it. And on June 6, 1944, that impossible, ridiculous, barely functional truck would save 300 lives. Now, let's talk about the woman driving it, Margaret Maggie Thornton. Born March 15, 1916, in Manchester, England. Her father, Robert Thornton, was a factory mechanic. Her mother, Elizabeth, was a seamstress. Maggie grew up in a working-class neighborhood in industrial Manchester. Her father worked at a textile machinery factory, repairing and maintaining the massive mechanical looms. From age 6, Maggie would go to the factory with him on weekends and watch him work. My father could look at a broken machine and know exactly what was wrong just by listening to it, she said in a 1985 interview. He taught me that machines aren't mysterious. They're just metal and moving parts. If you understand how they work, you can fix them. And if you can fix them, you can make them do things they weren't designed to do. By age 10, Maggie could disassemble and reassemble a carburetor. By age 12, she was helping her father repair factory equipment. By age 14, she was rebuilding motorcycle engines in the family's tiny garage. Maggie wanted to study mechanical engineering at university. Her family couldn't afford it. In 1932, at age 16, she left school and got a job as a mechanic's assistant at a vehicle repair shop in Manchester. The shop owner, Thomas Brennan, was initially skeptical about hiring a teenage girl as a mechanic. "Women don't have the strength for this work," he told her. Maggie's response, "I don't need strength. I need knowledge. And I have that." She proved it. Within 6 months, she was the best diagnostic mechanic in the shop. She could identify engine problems faster than mechanics with 20 years of experience. She had an intuitive understanding of how vehicles worked. From 1932 to 1939, she worked as a mechanic, specializing in truck and commercial vehicle repair. She developed expertise in keeping old, worn-out vehicles running long past their expected lifespan. Shop owners loved her because she could fix vehicles that other mechanics had given up on. She could make parts when replacement parts weren't available. She could improvise solutions to mechanical problems that seemed impossible. September 3, 1939, Britain declared war on Germany. Maggie was 23 years old. She immediately tried to enlist in the military. The British Army rejected her application. "Women aren't allowed in combat roles. We need soldiers, not mechanics." She tried the Royal Air Force. Same response. She tried the Royal Navy. Same response. "I can keep vehicles running in conditions that would destroy them," she told the recruitment officers. "I can repair engines under fire. I can drive through anything. You need me." They didn't want her, so she found another way to serve. September 1940. The Blitz began. German bombers attacked London and other British cities night after night. Thousands of civilians killed. Tens of thousands wounded. Emergency services overwhelmed. Maggie joined the Auxiliary Ambulance Service, a civilian volunteer organization that provided emergency medical transport during air raids. They desperately needed drivers and vehicles. They didn't care that she was a woman. They cared that she had a truck and knew how to drive it. That's when she acquired the 1932 Bedford. It had been sitting in a scrapyard, deemed too old and broken to be worth repairing. Maggie bought it for almost nothing, spent 2 weeks rebuilding the engine, and converted it into an ambulance. For the next 3 years, September 1940 to June 1944, Maggie drove the ambulance through the London Blitz and then through the preparations for D-Day. She evacuated wounded civilians from bomb buildings. She transported injured soldiers from training accidents. She drove through burning streets while bombs fell around her. She kept that truck running through conditions that destroyed newer, better-maintained vehicles. She became legendary among the ambulance crews. If Maggie can't fix it, it can't be fixed. If Maggie can't drive through it, it can't be driven through. That truck should have died years ago, but Maggie won't let it. By June 1944, Maggie had logged over 50,000 miles in that truck. She'd evacuated over 2,000 wounded people. She'd been bombed, shot at, caught in building collapses, and driven through fires. The truck had been damaged and repaired dozens of times. It was held together with improvised parts and constant maintenance. And when the call came for ambulance drivers to support the D-Day invasion, Maggie volunteered immediately. The military officers looked at her truck and laughed. "You can't take that thing to Normandy. It won't survive the Channel crossing, let alone combat conditions." Maggie looked him in the eye and said, "This truck has survived 3 years of the Blitz. It'll survive D-Day, and so will I." They didn't believe her, but they were desperate for ambulances, so they let her go. On June 5, 1944, Maggie and her truck were loaded onto a landing ship and transported across the English Channel to Normandy. The truck made the crossing without breaking down, which surprised everyone except Maggie. June 6, 1944, 6:30 a.m., H hour. The invasion began. Maggie was positioned 3 miles inland from Omaha Beach at a field hospital, a collection of medical tents set up in a partially protected area behind the front lines. Her job was to drive to casualty collection points near the beach, load wounded soldiers, and transport them back to the field hospital for treatment. It was supposed to be relatively safe. The casualty collection points were supposed to be behind the front lines, out of direct fire. The roads were supposed to be secured by advancing infantry. None of that was true. The invasion was going badly. German resistance was far stronger than expected. Allied troops were pinned down on the beaches. Casualties were catastrophic. The casualty collection points were being set up right on the beach, under direct German artillery and machine gun fire, because there was nowhere else to put them. The roads weren't secured. They were under constant shelling, and the wounded were dying. Hundreds of them lie on the sand, bleeding out, waiting for evacuation that wasn't coming fast enough. At 7:30 a.m., Maggie received her first call. "We need ambulances at Collection Point Alpha. Immediate. We have over 50 critical casualties. They'll die if we don't evacuate them in the next 30 minutes. Collection Point Alpha was on Omaha Beach, right on the beach, under active fire. The other ambulance drivers refused to go. That's a death sentence. We can't drive onto an active battlefield. We'll be killed before we load the first casualty. Maggie started her engine. Then I'll go alone. A British medical officer tried to stop her. Thornton, that's suicide. Your truck has no armor. One artillery shell, and you're dead. Maggie put the truck in gear. Those men are already dead if someone doesn't get them. I'm going. She drove toward the beach. The road to Omaha Beach was 2 miles of hell. German artillery was shelling the road continuously. Shells exploded in the fields on both sides, throwing up geysers of dirt and shrapnel. Craters pockmarked the road surface. Burning vehicles blocked sections of the route. Wounded soldiers stumbled along the sides of the road, trying to walk back to the field hospital because there weren't enough ambulances. Maggie drove through it. The truck suspension wasn't designed for this. Every crater, She sent a bone-jarring impact through the frame. The engine screamed as she pushed it to maximum speed. The transmission ground and protested as she shifted gears without fully engaging the clutch. The brakes smoked as she slowed for obstacles and then accelerated again. She could hear shrapnel hitting the truck, pinging off the metal hood, tearing through the canvas sides of the cargo compartment. She kept driving. A shell exploded 50 yards to her left. The blast wave rocked the truck sideways. She corrected, kept the wheels on the road, kept moving. Another shell. Closer. Dirt and debris rained down on the windshield. A crack appeared in the glass. She kept driving. She reached the beach at 7:47 a.m., 17 minutes from the field hospital. What she saw was beyond anything she'd experienced in 3 years of the Blitz. The beach was chaos. Thousands of soldiers trying to advance inland under withering German fire. Bodies floating in the surf. Wounded men crawling up the sand, leaving trails of blood. Medics working frantically to stabilize casualties while bullets kicked up sand around them. Landing craft burning. Tanks destroyed. Equipment scattered everywhere. And in the middle of it, Collection Point Alpha, a makeshift medical station set up behind a destroyed tank. 53 wounded soldiers lying on stretchers or sitting propped against equipment. Medics triaging, trying to determine who could be saved and who was too far gone. Maggie drove the truck directly to the collection point. Shells were exploding on the beach. Machine gun fire was raking the sand. She didn't stop. She backed the truck up to the medical station, jumped out, and opened the rear doors. "Load them," she shouted to the medics. The medics stared at her. "You drove through that? In that truck? Load them now. We don't have time." They loaded. Stretchers on the floor. Wounded soldiers on the benches. Soldiers who could sit crammed into every available space. The truck was designed to carry maybe 15 casualties. They loaded 23. The truck's suspension sagged under the weight. The tires compressed. The frame groaned. Maggie didn't care. "That's all we can fit. I'll be back in 30 minutes. She climbed back into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove off the beach. The return trip was worse. The truck was overloaded. The suspension was bottoming out on every bump. The engine was overheating from the strain. The brakes were barely functional under the extra weight, and the wounded were screaming. Every impact, every crater, every sudden movement sent waves of pain through their injuries. Maggie could hear them in the back. She drove as smoothly as she could, but there was no smooth way to drive through a shelled road. A shell exploded directly in front of her. The blast threw debris across the road. She swerved, felt the right side tires leave the ground for a moment, corrected, kept moving. The engine temperature gauge was in the red. The engine was going to overheat and seize if she didn't let it cool down. She couldn't stop. The wounded would die. She kept driving. She reached the field hospital at 8:14 a.m., 27 minutes round trip. 23 casualties evacuated. The medics unloaded the wounded. Maggie checked the truck. The engine was smoking. The oil pressure was dropping. 2 of the tires had shrapnel punctures and were slowly deflating. The windshield had 3 new cracks. The canvas sides of the cargo compartment were shredded. She added oil to the engine, patched the tires with rubber plugs, poured water over the engine to cool it down. 5 minutes of repairs. At 8:19 a.m., she received another call. Collection Point Alpha still has 30 casualties. Collection Point Bravo has 40. We need ambulances immediately. The other drivers were still refusing to go. It's suicide. We'll wait until the beach is secured. Maggie started her engine. Those men don't have time to wait. She drove back to the beach. Trip 2, 8:19 a.m. to 8:51 a.m. Collection Point Alpha, loaded 19 casualties. Engine overheating again. Left rear tire completely flat, running on the rim. Drove back on 3 tires and a rim. 32 minutes round trip. 19 casualties evacuated. Total 42. Trip 3, 8:56 a.m. to 9:24 a.m. Collection Point Bravo, loaded 21 casualties. Windshield shattered by shrapnel. Drove back with no windshield wind and debris hitting her face. 28 minutes round trip. 21 casualties evacuated. Total, 63. Trip 4, 9:29 a.m. to 9:54 a.m. Collection Point Alpha. Loaded 18 casualties. Right front tire blew out. Drove back on 2 rims and 2 tires. 25 minutes round trip. 18 casualties evacuated. Total, 81. By 10 a.m., Maggie had made 4 trips. She'd evacuated 81 casualties. She'd been driving for 2.5 hours under continuous fire. The truck was dying. The engine was held together by willpower. The tires were destroyed. The brakes were gone. She was using engine braking and downshifting to slow down. The steering was loose and unresponsive. The frame was cracked in multiple places. Bullet holes and shrapnel damage covered every surface. Any sane person would have stopped, would have declared the vehicle non-functional, would have waited for a replacement. Maggie kept driving. Trip 5, 10:02 a.m. to 10:24 a.m. Collection Point Bravo. Loaded 17 casualties. Transmission slipping. Had to shift without the clutch for every gear change. 22 minutes round trip. 17 casualties evacuated. Total 98. Trip 6, 10:28 a.m. to 10:47 a.m. Collection Point Alpha. Loaded 20 casualties. Engine misfiring. Running on 5 cylinders instead of 6. 19 minutes round trip. 20 casualties evacuated. Total 118. At 10:50 a.m., a British medical officer physically tried to stop her from leaving again. Thornton, stop. That truck is going to kill you. The engine is about to explode. The frame is cracked. You're driving on rims. You can't make another trip. Maggie looked at him. Her face was covered in dirt and blood. Not her blood. Blood from the wounded she'd been loading and unloading. Her hands were blistered from gripping the steering wheel. Her arms were shaking from the physical effort of controlling a truck with no power steering and broken suspension. How many wounded are still on the beach? She asked. Over 200, the officer said. But other ambulances are starting to make runs now. You've done enough. You've saved nearly 120 men. Stop before you get killed. 200 men, Maggie said. Still on the beach. Still dying. I'm going back. She drove back to the beach. Trip 7, 10:52 a.m. to 11:09 a.m. Collection Point Alpha. Loaded 16 casualties. Engine smoking heavily. Oil pressure nearly 0. 17 minutes round trip. 16 casualties evacuated. Total 134. Trip 8, 11:13 a.m. to 11:29 a.m. Collection Point Bravo. Loaded 18 casualties. Left front tire rim cracked. Truck pulling hard to the left. 16 minutes round trip. 18 casualties evacuated. Total 152. Trip 9, 11:33 a.m. to 11:48 a.m. Collection Point Alpha. Loaded 15 casualties. Brakes completely gone. Using only engine braking. 15 minutes round trip. 15 casualties evacuated. Total 167. Trip 10, 11:52 a.m. to 12:06 p.m. Collection Point Bravo. Loaded 19 casualties. Steering column cracked. Steering wheel loose. 14 minutes round trip. 19 casualties evacuated. Total 186. By noon, Maggie had made 10 trips. She'd evacuated 186 casualties. She'd been driving for 4.5 hours. The truck should have been dead. The engine should have seized. The frame should have collapsed. The wheels should have fallen off. But Maggie knew that truck. She knew exactly how much punishment it could take. She knew which parts were critical and which would fail without stopping the vehicle. She knew how to nurse a dying engine through 1 more mile. She knew how to steer a truck with a broken steering column. She knew how to stop a truck with no brakes. She kept driving. Trip 11, 12:10 p.m. to 12:23 p.m. Collection Point Alpha. Loaded 17 casualties. Engine running on 4 cylinders. Barely making 15 miles per hour. 13 minutes round trip. 17 casualties evacuated. Total, 203. Trip 12, 12:27 p.m. to 12:39 p.m. Collection Point Bravo. Loaded 16 casualties. Transmission locked in second gear. Couldn't shift. Drove entire trip in second gear. 12 minutes round trip. 16 casualties evacuated. Total, 219. Trip 13, 12:43 p.m. to 12:54 p.m. Collection Point Alpha. Loaded 14 casualties. Fuel pump failing. Engine sputtering. 11 minutes round trip. 14 casualties evacuated. Total, 233. Trip 14, 12:58 p.m. to 1:08 p.m. Collection Point Bravo. Loaded 15 casualties. Electrical system failing. No lights. No gauges. Driving by feel and sound. 10 minutes round trip. 15 casualties evacuated. Total, 248. Trip 15, 1:12 p.m. to 1:21 p.m. Collection Point Alpha. Loaded 13 casualties. Engine temperature beyond measurement. Metal glowing red under the hood. 9 minutes round trip. 13 casualties evacuated. Total, 261. Trip 16, 1:25 p.m. to 1:33 p.m. Collection Point Bravo. Loaded 12 casualties. Frame cracked so badly the truck was bending in the middle. 8 minutes round trip. 12 casualties evacuated. Total, 273. At 1:35 p.m., Maggie pulled into the field hospital for the 16th time. She'd evacuated 273 casualties. She'd been driving for 6 hours. The truck was unrecognizable. The hood was gone, blown off by an explosion. The engine was exposed, glowing red-hot, smoking, making sounds that no engine should make. The windshield was completely gone. The canvas sides of the cargo compartment were shredded to ribbons. All 4 tires were destroyed. She was driving on 4 rims. The frame was visibly cracked and bent. Bullet holes and shrapnel damage covered every surface. You could see through the truck in multiple places. The medics unloaded the casualties. Maggie sat in the driver's seat, hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. A medical officer approached. "Thornton, you need to stop. The truck is finished. You're finished. You've done more than anyone could ask." Maggie didn't respond. She was calculating, listening to the engine, assessing the damage. "How many wounded are still on the beach?" she finally asked. "Maybe 30, the officer said, "but we have other ambulances running now. You don't need to go back." 30 men, Maggie said. "I can fit 15 per trip. 2 more trips." "Thornton, that truck won't make 2 more trips. It won't make 1 more trip. The engine is about to explode. The frame is about to snap in half. If you drive that thing 1 more mile, it will kill you." Maggie started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, and somehow caught, running on maybe 3 cylinders, making a grinding, shrieking noise that sounded like metal tearing itself apart. 2 more trips, she said. She drove back to the beach. Trip 17, 1:38 p.m. to 1:45 p.m. Collection Point Alpha. Loaded 14 casualties. Engine seized halfway back. Maggie coasted the truck on momentum and gravity, using the downhill slope of the road to keep moving. The truck rolled into the field hospital with a dead engine. 7 minutes. 14 casualties evacuated. Total, 287. The truck stopped. The engine was silent. Smoke poured from under the hood. Maggie sat in the driver's seat. She tried to restart the engine. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. The engine was dead. Seized solid. No amount of mechanical knowledge could bring it back. She'd made 17 trips. She'd evacuated 287 casualties. She'd driven for 6 hours and 15 minutes under continuous fire. And there were still casualties on the beach. Maggie got out of the truck. She walked to the medical officer. "I need another vehicle." The officer stared at her. "Thornton, you can barely stand. You've been driving for 6 hours. You evacuated nearly 300 men. You're done." "They're still wounded on the beach," Maggie said. "I need another vehicle." "We don't have another vehicle to give you. Every ambulance is in use." Maggie looked around the field hospital. There was a supply truck parked nearby, a standard military lorry. No medical equipment, no stretchers, just a cargo truck. "I'll take that," she said, pointing to the supply truck. "That's not an ambulance," the officer said. "It has wheels and an engine," Maggie said. "That's all I need." She walked the supply truck, climbed in, started the engine, and drove toward the beach. Trip 18, 1:52 p.m. to 1:59 p.m. Collection Point Bravo. The supply truck had no medical equipment, no stretchers, no benches. Maggie loaded 13 wounded soldiers into the cargo bed, laying them on the bare metal floor. She drove back to the field hospital as gently as she could. 7 minutes. 13 casualties evacuated. Total, 300. At 2 p.m., Maggie Thornton pulled into the field hospital for the final time. She'd evacuated exactly 300 wounded soldiers. She made 18 trips. She'd driven for 6.5 hours under continuous German artillery and machine gun fire. She parked the supply truck, turned off the engine, and sat in the driver's seat. A crowd of medics, doctors, and soldiers had gathered. They'd been watching her all day, watching her drive that impossible truck through impossible conditions, watching her refuse to stop, watching her save life after life after life. When she finally climbed out of the supply truck, they started clapping. Slowly at first, then louder. Within seconds, the entire field hospital was applauding. Maggie didn't acknowledge it. She walked back to her original truck, the 1932 Bedford that everyone had mocked, the truck that shouldn't have survived 5 minutes on the battlefield, the truck that had made 17 trips and evacuated 287 casualties before finally dying. She stood in front of it, looking at the destroyed engine, the shredded body, the bullet holes, the shrapnel damage. A British officer approached her. "Thornton, I owe you an apology. I said that truck was a death trap. I said it wouldn't last 5 minutes. I was wrong." Maggie ran her hand along the truck's battered hood. "This truck saved 287 lives today. It did exactly what I built it to do. It kept running until there was nothing left to run on. That's not a death trap. That's a miracle." She turned to the officer. "And now I need to rebuild it, because tomorrow there will be more wounded, and they'll need this truck again." The officer stared at her. "Thornton, that truck is finished. It's scrap metal. The engine is seized. The frame is cracked. The wheels are destroyed. You can't rebuild that." Maggie looked at him with the same calm confidence she'd shown all day. "I've rebuilt this truck a dozen times. I'll rebuild it again, because this truck doesn't quit. And neither do I." Over the next 3 days, Maggie Thornton rebuilt that truck. She scavenged parts from destroyed vehicles. She fabricated new components from scrap metal. She rebuilt the engine from the ground up. She welded the cracked frame. She installed new wheels. She patched the bullet holes. She replaced the canvas sides. On June 10th, 1944, for days after D-Day, the truck was running again, and Maggie drove it back to the beach to evacuate more wounded. She continued driving that truck for the next 11 months, to the Battle of Normandy, the liberation of Paris, the Battle of the Bulge, and finally into Germany itself. She evacuated over 3,000 wounded soldiers during the war. She drove over 100,000 miles. She was wounded twice by shrapnel but refused to stop driving. The truck was destroyed and rebuilt 7 more times. Each time, Maggie brought it back to life. By the time the war ended in May 1945, that 1932 Bedford truck, the one everyone had mocked as the worst ambulance in the Allied invasion force, had become the most famous ambulance in the British Army. Soldiers called it the Unkillable. Medics called it Maggie's Miracle. Historians would later call it the ambulance that refused to die. And Maggie Thornton, the woman everyone had doubted, became a legend. After the war, Maggie was awarded the George Medal for Gallantry. The citation read, "For conspicuous bravery and devotion to duty during the invasion of Normandy, Driver Thornton made 18 trips under continuous enemy fire, evacuating 300 wounded soldiers who would have died without her actions. She displayed extraordinary courage, mechanical skill, and determination in the face of extreme danger. She was also mentioned in dispatches 3 times, recommended for the military medal, recognized by the French government with the Croix de Guerre. But Maggie never considered herself a hero. In a 1985 interview, she said, "I was just a mechanic who knew how to keep a truck running. The real heroes were the soldiers on that beach, the medics working under fire, the men who fought and died. I just drove a truck. Anyone could have done it." The interviewer responded, "But no one else did do it. The other ambulance drivers refused to go onto the beach. You went 18 times. Maggie shrugged. "Someone had to. Those men needed help. I had a truck. It was simple. But your truck was falling apart. Everyone said it wouldn't survive." "Everyone was wrong," Maggie said. "That truck was built in 1932. It was designed to last maybe 10 years under normal conditions. By 1944, it had been through 12 years of hard use, 3 years of the Blitz and D-Day. It should have died a dozen times. But it didn't, because I understood it. I knew every bolt, every wire, every weakness. I knew how to keep it alive. And as long as it was alive, I could save lives with it. Do you think your mechanical knowledge made the difference?" "Absolutely," Maggie said. "Most drivers see a vehicle as a tool. When it breaks, they wait for someone else to fix it. I saw that truck as a partner. When it broke, I fixed it. When it was damaged, I repaired it. When it was dying, I kept it alive. That's the difference. I didn't just drive that truck. I understood it. And that understanding saved 300 lives on D-Day. The truck itself survived the war. After the German surrender in May 1945, Maggie drove it back to England. She wanted to keep it, but the military classified it as surplus equipment and sent it to a vehicle depot for disposal. Maggie protested. That truck saved over 3,000 lives during the war. It deserves better than a scrapyard. The military didn't care. Surplus equipment was surplus equipment. So Maggie did what she'd always done. She found another way. She tracked down the truck at the disposal depot. She submitted a purchase request. She argued that as a civilian volunteer, she had the right to purchase the vehicle she'd used during her service. She filled out forms. She wrote letters. She refused to give up. In September 1945, the military finally agreed. They sold her the truck for £10. Maggie brought it home to Manchester. She restored it completely, rebuilt the engine again, repaired all the war damage, repainted it, made it look almost new, and then she kept driving it. She used it as her personal vehicle for the next 30 years. She drove it to work. She drove it on errands. She drove in parades on Remembrance Day. People would see the old truck and ask, "Is that the ambulance from D-Day?" Maggie would smile and say, "This is the ambulance that saved 300 men on D-Day, and it's still running." In 1975, at age 59, Maggie finally retired the truck. She donated it to the Imperial War Museum in London, where it remains on display today. The museum placard reads, 1932 Bedford WTL ambulance, driven by Margaret Maggie Thornton during the D-Day invasion, June 6, 1944. This vehicle made 17 trips under enemy fire, evacuating 287 wounded soldiers from Omaha Beach. It was considered the worst ambulance in the Allied invasion force. It became the most effective life-saving vehicle on the beach. The bullet holes and shrapnel damage visible on the body are original and have been preserved as testament to conditions under which it operated. Visitors to the museum can see the truck today. They can see the bullet holes, the shrapnel damage, the patch frame, the improvised repairs. They can see the evidence of what that piece of junk truck accomplished, and they can read Maggie's words displayed next to the truck. This truck was built to deliver goods in peacetime. I turned it into a weapon against death. It wasn't designed for war, but neither was I. We both did what we had to do, and we both survived. Maggie Thornton lived until 2003. She died at age 87 in Manchester, the same city where she'd learned to be a mechanic as a teenager. In her final interview, conducted in 2002, she was asked, "What do you want people to remember about D-Day?" She thought for a moment, then said, "I want people to remember that heroism isn't always about strength or weapons or military training. Sometimes it's about knowledge, about skill, about refusing to quit when everyone else says it's impossible. I wasn't a soldier. I was a mechanic. But I used my knowledge to save lives. And that mattered just as much as any soldier's rifle." What about the truck? What do you want people to remember about the truck? Maggie smiled. "I want people to remember that everyone mocked it. Everyone said it was worthless. Everyone said it would fail. And then it saved 287 lives in one day. I want people to remember that you can't judge capability by appearance. That old, broken-down truck was more effective than any of the new, modern ambulances because it had something they didn't have. It had me, and I knew how to make it do the impossible. Do you have any regrets?" "Only one," Maggie said. "I wish I could have made one more trip. There were still wounded on the beach when my engine seized. I evacuated 287, but there were more. I wish I could have saved them all." "You saved 300 total, counting the final trip in the supply truck." "I know," Maggie said, "but there were more. There are always more. That's the thing about war. You can save hundreds of lives and still feel like it wasn't enough, because every life you don't save haunts you." She paused and added, "But I did everything I could. I drove that truck until it died, and then I found another truck and kept going. I didn't quit. And because I didn't quit, 300 men went home to their families. That has to be enough." The legacy of Maggie Thornton and her old truck ambulance extends far beyond D-Day. Her story became a case study in military logistics courses. How do you maximize the effectiveness of limited resources? How do you keep equipment operational under extreme conditions? How do you improvise solutions when standard procedures fail? The answer, according to military analysts, is you need people like Maggie Thornton, people who understand their equipment so thoroughly that they can push it beyond its designed limits, people who refuse to accept impossible as an answer, people who see problems as challenges to be solved rather than obstacles to be avoided. Her story also became important in discussions about women in combat roles. For decades after World War II, women were excluded from combat positions in most militaries. The argument was always the same. Women don't have the physical strength, the mental toughness, the ability to function under fire. Maggie Thornton proved that argument was nonsense. She drove into active combat zones 18 times in one day. She functioned under continuous artillery and machine gun fire for 6.5 hours. She saved 300 lives. She did it without military training, without armor, without weapons. She did it with mechanical knowledge, determination, and courage. As one military historian wrote in 1998, Margaret Thornton's actions on D-Day demonstrate that combat effectiveness has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with skill, knowledge, and willpower. She outperformed every male ambulance driver on the beach that day, not because she was stronger, not because she was better trained, but because she understood her vehicle better than anyone else, and she refused to quit when others gave up. That's the definition of a combat soldier. Today, Maggie's story is taught at military academies around the world. Her truck is displayed at the Imperial War Museum. Her name is listed on the D-Day Memorial in Normandy. And every year on June 6, veterans gather at the museum to pay tribute to Maggie's miracle, the worst ambulance in the Allied invasion force that became the most effective life-saving vehicle on Omaha Beach. There's a photograph of Maggie Thornton taken on June 7, 1944, the day after D-Day. She's standing next to her truck. Her face is covered in dirt and dried blood. Her uniform is torn and stained. Her hands are blistered and bandaged. She looks exhausted, haunted, like she's aged 10 years in one day. But she's smiling, a small, quiet smile, because behind her, visible in the background of the photograph, are rows of wounded soldiers receiving medical treatment. Soldiers who have died on the beach if she hadn't driven through hell to evacuate them. That photograph is displayed next to the truck at the Imperial War Museum. and beneath it is a quote from one of the soldiers she saved. I was lying on Omaha Beach with a bullet in my chest, bleeding out, waiting to die, and then I heard this terrible grinding, clattering noise. I looked up and saw the most beat-up, shot-up, falling-apart truck I'd ever seen. It looked like it had been through a war all by itself. And driving it was this woman, covered in dirt, face set with determination, eyes focused on the wounded. She jumped out, helped lower me into the back, and drove me to the field hospital. The ride was rough. The truck was falling apart around us. But she got me there. She saved my life. I later learned she made 17 more trips that day, saved 299 other men, all in that impossible truck that everyone said wouldn't last 5 minutes. I'm 78 years old now. I have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. None of them would exist if Maggie Thornton hadn't driven that piece of junk truck onto Omaha Beach and refused to quit. She's the reason I'm alive. She's my hero. That's the legacy of Maggie Thornton. That's the legacy of the old truck ambulance. 300 lives saved. One woman. One truck. One day. And a lesson that echoes through history. Never underestimate what's possible when knowledge, determination, and courage come together. Never judge capability by appearance. Never accept impossible as an answer, because sometimes the worst ambulance in the invasion force becomes the most effective life-saving vehicle on the beach. Sometimes the woman everyone doubts becomes a hero everyone remembers. Sometimes the old truck that everyone mocks becomes a miracle that saves 300 lives. That's not just history. That's inspiration. That's proof that one person with the right knowledge and the refusal to quit can change everything. Maggie Thornton proved it on June 6, 1944, and her story continues to prove it today.